I'm glad to be here and to be able to share some thoughts with you. I was asked an interesting question a couple of months ago. I was invited to a conference of culture experts, those who are doing research, writing, and studying culture, workplace culture. And I was asked this interesting question. The comment was, thriving organizational cultures have been proven beyond a doubt to deliver significantly better results. That has now happened across the board in just about every major metric. When you test for thriving workplace cultures, inevitably you will find outstanding results. And if that's the case, why is it that we don't see more organizations with thriving, successful workplace cultures? And I would just invite you to ask yourselves that question. How would you answer that? Why isn't your organization, or just about any organization, outstanding from a workplace culture standpoint? What gets in the way of that? And it was interesting to reflect on that. And as I thought a little bit about that particular question and compared that to the experiences that I've had around the world as I've met with thousands of HR leaders literally all around the world, here are some of the thoughts that I had around why we don't see a more powerful workplace culture focus. And I think it's for several reasons. One is, I don't see evidence of very cohesive culture strategies. Often there's been strategies around engagement and try to move the engagement needle, but I haven't seen very clear, cogent plans. This is our culture strategy. I haven't seen good clarity, generally speaking, around what their desired culture needs to be to move into the company that they're becoming. Often people will speak to evidences and examples of their current culture, but not a lot of clarity around what's the culture we need to grow into. Every workplace culture, much like a personality, has pros and cons, has attributes about it that are effective and successful, and there are some that need to be left behind. And I think what I'm seeing with successful organizations is a much stronger sense of intentionality around actually shaping the culture, and not just acknowledging that there is one, like a personality, and you just have to work your way around it. But being intentional about what specific things are you trying to edit out of the culture, and what specific things are you trying to either add or amplify to the culture. Because culture is dynamic, it is not static. It's very, very powerful in most organizations and has a powerful effect on people's ability to think, their ability to interact, and literally what gets done in a company. Another thing that I'm not seeing good evidence of for a lot of organizations is a good alignment between the intended culture and what is expected from a customer standpoint. To bring those in alignment, I think, is really, really key. I've seen organizations that are very proud of themselves, but don't necessarily have that outside-in perspective that characterizes great culture. Another thing I'm not seeing around the world is good metrics for tracking and measuring culture. I think that's another reason why we're not seeing companies all over the world really do this right. And finally, governance. What are the actual elements of governance when it comes to workplace culture? Is the CEO asking for that? Are boards asking for that? I think we're about to see a fundamental shift happen. In the United States, the largest association for boards of directors is the National Association for Corporate Directors. Each association around the world, in many different countries, they have resources that are specifically designed for corporate board directors. And it was interesting to note that just last year, this group added culture as a core metric, a core ingredient of what it takes to manage organizations. And I found this interesting. This quote came right out of that particular report. Corporate culture can no longer be considered as a soft issue by management and boards. Its strength or weakness has a lasting impact on organizational performance and reputation. The oversight of culture must be a key board responsibility, as it is inextricably linked with strategy, CEO selection, and risk oversight. That, I think, is placing culture right where it ought to be. And I predict that what we're going to see over the next several years are boards of directors starting to ask the CEO for the culture plan. What is the culture strategy and how are we doing? And our prediction as well is who's the CEO going to turn to get help with shaping that strategy? It's typically going to be HR. And so all of you, many of you may already have been asked for your culture strategy and plan. But we see that gaining momentum. I was just with a large airline about a month ago, and they mentioned they were getting board requests for their culture strategy, and something that's cohesive and put together, not just what different initiatives are we currently running, but how are those choreographed, how are those brought together to really make a difference. What are some of the other headwinds that create some challenges for us as we build thriving, cohesive workplace cultures? Certainly an increase in diversity. Diversity has been proven again and again to strengthen workplace cultures, to strengthen teams, to add all of the freshness of thought from which innovation arises. And yet, it also presents some challenges as people want to be known for those differences that sometimes have a fracturing effect on the overall sense of oneness for an organization. And that duality is something a lot of companies are wrestling with. Then the generational conflict that's obviously brought up by the fact that we now have 5 generations in the workplace. And we're seeing significant challenges occurring as people are leading folks from generations much different from themselves. And I think it has very little to do with age. I think it has everything to do with life experience and perspective. And how do you bring all of those together to create a sense of unification, especially when you have offices and team members all over the world? How do you both recognize the differences and value and honor the differences while still creating a sense of cohesion, a sense of what it is to be us and how we will differentiate and move forward. And finally, obviously, the use of technology, artificial intelligence, as it continues to make its way not only into our consumer lives, but into our enterprises. That's creating also some disruption and a lot of concern that obviously then plays its way into our cultures. It's interesting, particularly with technology, that though we are perhaps more connected than any other group in history, the interesting thing is most people actually are currently feeling disconnected. And I found this quote very, very interesting. As we talk about loneliness and the sense of disconnection, and I'm seeing this everywhere, loneliness isn't the physical absence of other people. It's the sense that you're not sharing anything that matters with anyone else. And I thought that's an insightful point. So often, particularly with social media and all of the different opportunities we have to interact, yet it seems that despite all of those interactions, there's not a depth that is creating the kinds of connection and bonds that hold organizations together, that forge powerful, high-performing teams. When those connections are shallow, you lack in that ability to bring power to an organization. And that's something I wanted to talk a little bit more about today. We just concluded at the O.C. Tanner Institute. For those of you who are not familiar with the O.C. Tanner Company, we're the world's largest employee recognition and appreciation company and culture building tools. And that's part of what we provide and do. We have offices around the world. And we have the O.C. Tanner Institute, which is a group that does a ton of research around workplace culture. And we just completed our 2018 global study, and I'll be sharing a few of the insights from that research today. And we have a report that we published that's available at our booth just outside the doors here that you're welcome to come by and get a copy of. But from the study, we were interested to better understand, looking through the lens of the employee, through the lens of the employee experience, what matters most to them when it comes to creating connected, thriving workplace cultures. What are those core ingredients that employees look to? We're all pretty good about looking from the top down and saying this is what we need from an organizational standpoint, but looking through the lens of the employee, what is it that matters most to them? And what we identified from our research, our first round of research that we did last year, that was then validated in each of the countries again this year, were 6 core areas that we refer to as talent magnets. These are the core dimensions of what employees want from their organization when it comes to bringing the strength of their engagement to the table. And I'll just go through a couple of these briefly today due to the interest of time. But purpose, opportunity, success, appreciation, well-being, and leadership. And each one of these has a powerful role to play in employees' choice whether or not to bring their discretionary effort to work or not. It's interesting that even though that's what's important to employees, the research proves out that when employees have those 6 areas in motion in their organization where they feel like they are just at or slightly above average, you get these kinds of returns. 4 times more likely to have highly engaged employees, 4 times more likely to have employees that are promoters on the Net Promoter Score, 7 times more likely to have employees that are innovating at organizations that do well in each of these 6 areas, 11 times less likely to have layoffs, and 74% more likely to have increased revenues. Those are markers of success in that organization. And when we see attention being given to create connection to each of those core areas, we see significant improvements in all of the metrics that we track for organizations. Interestingly enough, we often think of each one of these as being fairly discrete and independent. And yet, once we ran the statistical modeling against each 6 area, we see high degrees of correlation between each of them. And the good news there, and I think this is what lends itself well to think about your culture strategy more holistically, because they relate to one another. And when you get lift in one, you get lift in other areas as well, because of these interdependencies that employees come to experience within their work environment. Connection has a powerful effect. It actually does change mindsets. It deepens our understanding, and it does increase the sense of cohesiveness. We talk a lot about individual work teams where so much of the work is done. These 6 core talent magnets, while they operate and we can measure them at an organizational level, they also have an equal level of influence at the team level. And how do you create the strong sense of teams that are delivering outstanding results? What are those connections that are formed? And when you think about how are powerful connections formed in your work area, if you have a powerful connection to your current team, to your leader, to your organization, why? How did that come into being? How did that emotional connection actually get forged in the first place? I think these are the questions we have to ask ourselves if we're about this process of building thriving, highly connected teams. What is the building block of connection? One of the things you will probably discover if you think about what's made the connections for you, it's experiences. Experiences forge powerful connections. I had, as I was just looking back through my own career for those moments, those experiences that actually forged powerful connections, one of them came to my mind quite quickly. It's when I actually left the O.C. Tanner Company many years ago. It was during the internet boom, and I had a friend of mine who was starting an internet company, and he said, hey, come be head of product development and technology for this new internet company. It was in an education space. And I thought, I've got this startup in me. I've got to go do a startup at some point. My kids were young. I thought now's the right time to do it. So I let my employer at the time, O.C. Tanner, know that I was leaving. I wasn't leaving because I didn't love the company. I just wanted this opportunity. So as I was preparing to leave on the last day, my work group team threw a little going away party for me at a local Chinese restaurant, and we're sitting there and they're roasting me and, making fun of me for leaving and stuff like that. And all of a sudden, our CEO walks in. Well, to give you a sense of this, he was several levels above me, and he was formerly a trial attorney. So not exactly a touchy-feely kind of guy. Not super warm. And when he walked in, the whole place went quiet. And I thought, oh, great. Is he going to serve me papers on what I can or can't do leaving the organization? Like, where's this going to go? And it was a little tense. And he walked in, and he came up to the front, and the little group was maybe 15 or 20 of us. And he said, hey, I just wanted to come and say one thing. I want to say thank you for what you've done for the organization. You've made a significant difference here. And I just wanted to let you know we appreciate that. And if anything ever changes at the company you're going to, or if the internet bubble bursts at some point, we'd take you back. We'd love to have you come back to the organization. And then, which blew me away, right? Because I'm thinking, don't let the door hit you on the way out, is what I kind of expected. And here he is saying thank you for the contributions I had made for the organization. I'd worked there about 7 years at the time. And then as he was preparing to leave, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out an airline ticket from Portland, Oregon, where I was moving my family to, back to Salt Lake City, where we were headquartered, and said, I'm serious. We'd love to take you back anytime. And he gave me the ticket, and he walked out the door. How do you think that affected me? When I went home that night, I said to my wife, let me tell you what happened. And she listened to the story, and she said, and you're still leaving? What are you, crazy? I said, yeah, I got to go do this startup. But it was interesting. The story doesn't end there. About 2.5 years later, we had done this crazy ride with the startup. We'd finally turned it around, and we were having tremendous success. And it was about 2.5 years later. And the CEO called me and said, hey, your boss just left the organization. We want you back. That experience in that Chinese restaurant 2.5 years ago, that experience was so powerful. I could feel the same feelings of connection that I felt then 2.5 years later. And after a couple of weeks, made the decision to come back to the organization. I've been back to the company now 16 years. Love the company, love what we're all about. Experiences, and if you think through your own, big and small, experiences forge connection. And I think when we're tuned into that, we can be more mindful of what the kinds of experiences are that we can actually create and not just leave to default around us. Experiences are interesting things to track. We talk a lot about the employee experience as if it's one big thing. It's actually made up of lots and lots of little experiences, some that are high, some that are low, and the vast majority are forgettable. The vast majority of experiences around that dotted line across the middle, those are experiences you forget. Most experiences, the data show, are unmemorable, and we forget about them. But certain high experiences fundamentally change the connections we have with people and with organizations. They are, in fact, so powerful, they can even erase much of the memory of negative impacts from negative experiences. And I think that's an important point, because where do we spend most of our time? When we're out trying to improve employee experience in our organizations, where are we spending most of our time? Where do we usually go to begin our energy and our effort? It tends to be those lower level experiences, the red dots in our companies, those that we're hearing negative things about. That's where we tend to go. And I would argue that the smarter move from an ROI standpoint is to actually set your sights. Obviously, you've got to pay attention to real big problems. You've got to address them. You've got to go after them and fix them. But for most people, those red dots just go to unmemorable, to forgettable. So you do an awful lot of work to get very little progress from an actual connection standpoint. And so as you're thinking about architecting more powerful connective experiences at your organizations, think about going to those kinds of areas where you can build very powerful experiences that have lasting impact. And I think you'll get a lot more value out of that. So let's just talk about where do we make those connections. One of them is to purpose. Purpose is incredibly powerful. Purpose isn't just about a mission statement. It's not just about declaring what you do. It's about the why. It's about the core behind it. Purpose, to be powerful, needs to be aligned in three ways, not just for the employee value proposition, but also the customer value proposition, and then what difference do you make in the world? When you bring those three ingredients together in defining your own purpose, or redefining your purpose, or simply bringing clarity to a purpose that's been around a long time, but never really been well articulated in your organization. What effect does it have? We saw this popping out of the data, and it was powerful. You're 935% increased in the odds that an employee will have a sense of purpose. Because a sense of purpose is not just, oh, I know what our purpose is, but I have a connection to it. 858% increase in the odds that an employee will be engaged. Why? Because it answers the why question. It's a choice if people choose to go and engage more fully in their work. It's totally up to them. You cannot extract it from them. You cannot demand it of them. It's something that's given. And if your purpose is strong, people have a reason to do that. Let me just give you a quick example from KPMG. KPMG was struggling with this. They have a very strong brand. A lot of graduates coming out of accounting and finance degrees want to come and join KPMG. But typically after about 3 years, they move on. And so KPMG was working on this, thinking, why is it that they're leaving? As they drilled deeper into it, they discovered that people didn't have a strong sense of purpose there. Working on audits and accounting, not a hard thing to understand, maybe a sense of purpose being lacking. And they did something that I thought was very commendable and something that I would share for you if you are looking to create a more powerful connection for people to have a purpose. And that is they went back through what they referred to as an archaeological dig through the history of the organization, looking for ways in which KPMG had really made a difference that they were proud of. One of those, and then they basically took those examples and those stories and turned them into some communication campaigns that they then shared around the company. One of them on the far left was one that I'm particularly interested in. I grew up in Cape Town, South Africa. And when South Africa switched from a non-democracy to a democracy for the first time in its history, one of the biggest concerns that everybody had was the integrity of the vote. Could you trust the vote? So who did they bring in to help audit and ensure that the voting was done correctly and tabulated correctly? They brought in KPMG. They used that as an example of how KPMG made a difference in the world. And I thought that was powerful. But then the second thing they did I thought was even more powerful. They invited employees to submit their own experiences in what they had done to make a difference. They hoped to get 10,000 submissions. They got 43,000 submissions, and they turned those into campaigns and shared those. These ones to the right are both from employees that were submitted. I combat terrorism, and you may think, wait a second, you're in accounting, for goodness sakes. How are you combating terrorism? KPMG helps scores of financial institutions prevent money laundering, keeping financial resources out of the hands of terrorists and criminals. You can see the connection all the way back to purpose. I think that's a smart way to approach it, and I love that example because of it. They were able to create connections for every one of their employees to connect to something bigger that was going on in their organization. The second one I want to talk a little bit about is opportunity. Opportunity is powerful. People used to think of opportunity as pretty much moving up on the career ladder. For most organizations that are not in high growth mode, we've got to find more innovative ways to engage people. People want to grow. They want to develop, even if they know that the person who sits above them on the org chart isn't going anywhere. They still want a chance to grow. In our research, we discovered the vital importance of special projects to do this. Only half, roughly, of employees globally are involved in special projects. But it turns out that 3 out of every 4 of them feel that special projects help them grow in ways their day-to-day jobs cannot. They also reported they're more connected with people that they would not normally connect with and have a sense of increase in appreciation. A powerful, low-cost way of simply engaging people in initiatives that are going to help move things forward, that help them grow in new ways. And finally, I want to just talk for a minute about appreciation. How is appreciation and recognition happening around the world? Top right corner, only 57% of employees feel received a thank you from a leader in the last 30 days. The one in the lower left is more problematic for me. 42% of employees were told how they could also improve when they were receiving their recognition. Hey, great job on that project, fabulous. You know, you could have done this about this so much better. You could have done, that's not recognition, that's just feedback. I think we need to help our leaders understand the difference. There's a place for feedback and there's a place for recognition. There's work to be done in this area. So what is it that you appreciate? How is it? What is it that you say? How do you deal with this? Connect it back to what's important to your organization. Connect your recognition to what matters, what you care deeply about. We see this happen when employees are being recognized. Only about half of them are seeing a connection between the recognition they're being given and what actually is important to the organization. It's interesting that people respond. Only 32% of people say, my organization lives its values when there's no connection to values and recognition, compared to 83% when the connection is made between recognition and what matters at the organization. We work with Virgin Trains. Many of you are familiar with Virgin Trains, and I love the work that they did to try to articulate what matters to us. For them, they're trying to really disrupt an industry by delivering powerful experiences to their customers. So what do they recognize? They recognize the behaviors that lead to amazing customer experiences. Again, that strong line of sight from what it is that matters to what it is you're recognizing. What do you think happens to their culture when they do that? Their whole culture understands what's important, and when people are recognized, it simply reinforces that. It's very, very powerful. It's interesting that recognition has a disproportionately powerful role on culture. It creates lift in each one of the talent magnet categories. When somebody sees what matters and they're called out for that and a light is shined on some specific value that they've created, it makes a massive difference. I'm just shared with you the tip of the iceberg on the report that we have created. Again, those are available at our booth right next door. We've also created a number of tools around helping support those who are building and developing cultures. And so I think my time is up, but hopefully you've got some insights today that you can actually go and apply. And I just wish you well in building thriving workplace cultures. I think there is so much ahead. This is a young category for us all. And I think as we learn our way into this, we'll see some phenomenal gains in our organizations. And I wish you well in that endeavor. Thank you.